we have a rather unique situation. We're able to have somebody come in and tell us about their family, and hopefully some of the other people in their family will let them speak. But I'm going to let Bob Britton, our historian, give you an introduction.
Good evening, and thanks for coming again. It was kind of a warm night, and it's good to see over 100 people as usual to one of our presentations. I think this is 21, something like that, 20 or 21. All of these are available. All the previous ones are available in the library. If you look at the flyer that you got that announced the meeting, on the back of it, it lists all of the titles of the previous talks that we've had, and it's pretty impressive. And it wouldn't be possible unless we have people like you, many of you sitting out there have already given talks, people like you who are willing to come, become kind of an expert on a particular topic and share it with your neighbors and friends. Tonight's topic is a kind of interesting one. It's about a farm that's been in Bethany for a long, long time. And just by way of introduction to how this talk came about, just to show you the way these things happen, I got a letter dated March 13, 1998, to Mr. Clover, Brinton, town historian for the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. It starts off, I write to enlist your aid in locating farms in Bethany that might qualify for a Century Farm Award program of the Connecticut Agricultural Information Council. And they go on to tell what the criteria are for such an award. The Century Farm Award is sponsored by the Connecticut Agricultural Information Council Incorporated. The following factors are considered in the selection process. The farm shall have been owned and operated by the same family for at least 100 years. Ownership may descend through either male or female side. The family can be engaged in any type of farming and should be good farmers and stewards of the land. There should be evidence that likely continuation by the family of the farm business. The award consists of a handsome bronze plaque and a citation from the governor and is presented at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station's Plant Science Day in August. There are several farms in Bethany that probably would fit this criteria. Rightly or wrongly, I nominated the Woodward Farm, and in response to that, received an application packet, which I passed on to Marion Sandell, and as a homework project, which she worked on diligently, she came up with many of the materials that you see up on the table here. She came up with a whole little history of the family and the farm. This whole little history was passed on to the judges, and of all of the 169 towns in Connecticut, Bethany was chosen this year, and the Woodward Farm is the recipient for 2000 for this award. Marion and her sister and brother get an A+ on their paper. Okay, having said that, that's kind of how we got into it. Then, with all of this information, it seemed like, gee, let's share it with everybody. And that's exactly what a member of the family is going to do tonight. We have a seventh generation member, or seventh generation of the family is still working the farm, and Debbie Demander is going to be showing us some photographs of the Clover Nook farm, as it's called, past and present, and giving us a little history of the farm and of the family. And without any further ado, Debbie Demander.
Before I begin, I'd like to just thank a few people that helped me put this together. A big thanks to Will Bratton, who did a wonderful job on the slides you're going to see in a few moments. I'd like to thank my family, my father, and Aunt Helen, and Aunt Marion, who gave me all the stories, and Aunt Marion especially, who dug through diaries and letters and chests and closets and put this whole display together for you. We thank you all very much. Okay, I don't have my clicker. Okay, is that a little better?
Yes.
Turns it on. Not working? Okay, here we are at Clover Farm. I'm not touching it. Our story begins a long, long time ago, actually over 300 years ago in the mid-1600s, when Bethany was still a part of Milford. A man named Francis French had a farm in what is now the Derby-Milford area. About 1661, he bought land at the top of the hill here to be used for summer pasture. You can't see that in the light very well, but he used it for summer pasture for his livestock. His son, Francis Jr., and his grandson, Israel, went on to use this pasture land. When David French, Israel's son, married in 1765, he built a cabin on the property for he and his wife to live in. The cabin was originally located east of the present farmhouse, which here's the farm right now, and the cabin would have been somewhere back here. David French served in the Revolutionary War, and he served in the General Assembly for over 20 years. David's son, Harry French, the youngest of 12 children, was next to take over the farm. Shortly after Bethany was incorporated in 1832, he served as first selectman from 1835 to 1841. Harry and his wife, Harriet Peck, were very active in the Episcopal Church, where his father was deacon for many years. Can't quite see that one. This is a sketch that I did quite a while ago of the original house that was built. Harry built the house in 1825, and you can't really see it, but on the back there's a slant roof part of the building that was actually not a part of the original house. That was a summer kitchen that was added by Harry's son-in-law. See if this one's a little better. Okay. Of course, at that time there was no electric pumps to get water up to the house and the barns. This picture is actually taken underground, looking out through an old ram that is still there on the farm. The pieces aren't there, but the hole in the ground is. The way it worked was water came from a spring downhill to the ram through pipes, and then a process from the velocity of the water set off valves and pushed the water through a pipe all the way back up to the house. We have a book and a picture explaining that a little better up on the table here. Harry and Harriet French had one daughter named Jane. She taught school in Cheshire. And that is where she met Justice Peck. Justice Peck ran the first boat on the Farmington Canal. It was there on the canal that Justice and Jane Peck lived until their first child drowned in the canal at 2 years old. It was at that time that they decided to move to Bethany and work the farm. Justice Peck held many town offices and was one of the founders of the Woodbridge and Bethany Agricultural Society, of which he served as president for several years. The Agricultural Society held fairs each year at different town locations in Bethany and Woodbridge. The fair was held at Clover Nook Farm at least 3 times that we know of for sure, in 1862, 1864, and 1868. The fair in 1868 had, of course, the usual livestock and produce competitions, and there were said to be special categories like best wood stoves, best rugs, and best musical instruments. Justice Peck won in the fair in 1868 for best family horse and best matched pair of horses. There was also trotting activities that were held on the level stretch of road that goes past the farm. As many of you know, people still have the urge to use it as a raceway, only with a little more horsepower than they had back then. There was usually a parade held in conjunction with the fair, and this is a wagon that was decorated for a parade. And of course, you can't have a fair without food, and this is a ticket you would have bought to have a dinner at the fair. When the fair was held at Clover Nook, it was always held in the same field. My little pointer. The farm is here, and on the west side of Fairwood Road, there's a long lot. That's the lot where they had the fair each time they held it there. This is another shot of the lot, which we still today call the fair lot, looking in from the road. And this is inside the barway. They always had the fair in the fall after all the hay was mown off the field. It was actually many years later when my grandfather was asked to name the road, to choose a name for the road, that he combined the fair from the fair lot and wood from Woodward to come up with Fairwood. This is a picture, an old picture of the horse barn, which still stands today. On the right, far right section, there were 4 horse stalls and a harness room, which was under the stairs which ran across the front wall in that room. The large archway was used to park hay wagons, and the center bay that has the doors open on it was used for a buggy or a carriage shed. On the left-hand side is a room that they called the grindstone room. They used to sharpen the knives and farm tools there on a grindstone that they turned with a hand crank. Upstairs there were holes or openings in the floor where they threw hay down into the horses, and metal tubes that shot the grain down in front of the horses. This is a more recent photo of the horse barn, where we sell our farm products today, my husband and I. The room on the right is now used for equipment repair. If you look at the weather vane on the top, which I'm sure most of you have seen, back in the early 20s, some neighborhood boys used it as target practice, and when my grandfather caught them, they had to take it down and fill all the holes in. And you can still see where the holes were. This is a shed that they used to use to park equipment under. The shed's no longer there. It was to the right of the horse barn, directly across from the cow barn that's there today. The piece of equipment you see in front is a McCormick Deering horse-drawn lime spreader. Right? This building is today we use as a 3-car garage. There's white overhead doors. You probably have all seen it. Sits right on the road. But long ago, the right 2 bays were used as a carriage shed, but on the left was a blacksmith shop. And that's where Justice Peck's only son, Harry, used to shoe horses. Justice and Jane Peck had 3 children after they moved back to Bethany. They had Harry, Marietta, and Charlotte. Charlotte was the youngest that she's seen here. And she met and married Samuel Woodward when Samuel came from Watertown to teach school in Bethany. Samuel taught school at the Center School in Bethany, and he taught in the winter and he worked the farm in the summer. Samuel Woodward was elected second selectman in 1877, which he held for 4 years until 1881. At that time, he was elected to first selectman, and he held that position for 21 years until 1902. This is a copy of an old annual report from that time period. We do have another one up here, I believe, for you to look at. Samuel also served the town in several other positions during that time. Some of them were acting school visitor, which is like a school inspector. He was an agent for the town deposit fund, he was a highway commissioner, and he was a justice of the peace, among other things. On this page of the report, I don't know if you can make it out, but the town spent quite a bit of its budget on helping the paupers in town. And it was during that time when Samuel was first selectman that he used the parlor in the family home for paupers' funerals. And I'm told that the board that they used to lay out the bodies also doubled as the family wallpapering board. And I think just till a few years ago. Among the selectmen listed at the end of the report, you'll see the name of Harry Peck. That would have been Samuel's brother-in-law, the only son of Justice Peck. He had a farm here right on Peck Road, south of Clover, Nook. And as if Samuel wasn't busy enough right here in town, he was also Bethany's representative to the state legislature for many, many years. Among the many enterprises Samuel had going at the farm were those of raising apples, peaches, and vegetables. He also sold eggs and butter that was made on the farm. It wasn't the sweet butter that we use today, but it was made from cream that was soured in crocks in the family kitchen and then churned into butter. He made regular trips, usually weekly, to New Haven by horse and buggy to sell his farm produce. Not quite as often in the winter as in the warmer weather, but in the summer he would get up very early to leave, and he would cover the eggs and butter in fresh mown hay to keep them cool. And of course, with chickens and eggs come chicken coops. This is the 2-story section of this chicken coop was removed in the late 80s, but the front section still stands and is full of chickens at the moment. This is another coop that stands behind the house. The machine shed, most of it has fallen down and been removed, but the front half is still there, and that was later turned into a woodworking shop by my Uncle Dudley. When the Davidson telephone exchange system was brought into Bethany in the late 1800s, the farm was one of the first to be wired in. This is a map depicting the lines in town originally, and if you look in the upper left hand on the green line, you see I guess I could point that out for you. Right over here is where the green line went into the home of, it's listed as Justice Peck. His wife Jane was still living at the time with Samuel and Charlotte. And I think my ancestors would get quite a hoot to see the farm on the front cover of the phone book 100 years later. In 1900, Samuel Woodward did extensive remodeling and renovations to the farmhouse. Among the changes were there was a veranda added to the front porch, and a large chimney in front was also replaced by a smaller chimney. And at that time, all the rooms surrounding the chimney were remodeled and refigured. His wife Charlotte wanted a formal dining room. So this winter kitchen, which was in the center of the house, was turned into the dining room, and the summer kitchen, which was actually just a slant roof section, was winterized with the second story added above. And those were extra sleeping quarters for hired men. This is a picture of the kitchen as it pretty much looked after the 1900 remodel. It was later remodeled again by my grandmother in 1936, and Aunt Marion's probably made quite a few improvements after that. But it still is pretty much the same layout, and it's got a lot of the same old charm. Aunt Marion no longer cooks on wood, and she does have an electric refrigerator over on the right by the door. As I said, the veranda was added at that time, and if you look in the back, there's a second building all of a sudden standing there, and that was added. That was built at that time also. That was a wash house. There was a central chimney with a wood stove downstairs where the washing was done, and then there was extra sleeping quarters upstairs for more hired men. In the mid-1920s, the wash house was placed on logs and pulled by horses and moved to a lot south of the farm. This is where my sister presently lives, down the road. My sister Linda. Samuel and Charlotte Woodward had 3 children. Their eldest Daisy is on the right, Florence is on the left, and Sherman is in the middle. That would be my grandfather, and I'm going to refer to him as Sherman Sr., even though he wasn't senior until junior came along. Sherman Sr. attended Connecticut State Agricultural College in Storrs. Among the many accomplishments in his life, he was a founding member of the Hampton Poultry Co-op and the Connecticut Breeding Association. He was a member of the Connecticut Milk Producers Association, and he held state and local offices in the Farm Bureau and the Agricultural Extension Service. This is a picture of Sherman Sr. with his first wife, Rachel Carrington. She died young in childbirth. In the background you can see, this is really the only picture we could find of the original dairy barn. That was replaced by the one that's there now in the 1920s. In 1918, Sherman married his second wife, Margaret Twing, from Morris. Sherman and Margaret had 3 children. Sorry, I'm married. Helen, or most of you probably know her as Woody. She's up in the back. Marion, she lives in the farmhouse today. And there's Sherman Jr., or most of you know him as Monk. Here's another picture of the 3 children out on the side lawn by the house. And here is Sherman Jr. riding his first tractor. Sherman Sr. was actually the first to work a large dairy herd on the farm. I learned this was because until after the turn of the century, milk was really not generally drunk as a beverage. It was used in baking and cooking. Smaller herds were needed because really to get just the cream for the butter and cheese, and for baking and cooking. Skim milk was usually fed off to pigs or other livestock. This is a view of the chicken coops that were attached to the back of the dairy barn. These were later removed and replaced by a cinder block barn by Marion's husband, Dudley Sandell. That was about in the early 1950s they did that. On the left, you can see what we refer to as the famous pear tree. For those of you that have never heard the story, although I don't know how, was in the late 1940s when my grandfather had some of Clover Nook Farm's finest alumni working at the farm. Familiar names to many of you, like George Jackson, Dwight Johnson, Harold Simpson, Buster Johnson, Russ Winters, and of course, Sherman Jr. Buster used to park his car right up against that pear tree when he would come to work in the morning. He had a convertible. And one day the boys decided to play a little trick and chain his car to the pear tree. So when lunchtime rolled around and they urged him to peel out of the driveway, the car snapped back into the tree and Buster ended up with a car full of pears. The wooden silos on the farm had to be replaced several times over the years. In 1964, the present silo was put up, and that was built of cream tile blocks. And it's still pretty sturdy today. Behind Sherman Jr.'s head in this picture is a structure on the end of the dairy barn that you can see. That was called a milk house. There was a cement tank inside where they would put the cans of milk and surround them with blocks of ice to keep them cold. And this is a picture of an ice house. The walls were double, filled with insulation and with sawdust in between for insulation. And sawdust was also put between the blocks of ice to keep them frozen to use in the milk house. My Aunt Marion still remembers how wonderful it felt to sneak in there on a hot summer day and just sit. This might be Sherman Jr. on the way to use the toilet. That's the little building you see right behind him. The outhouse is still there, only it's full to the brim with garden tools now. Sherman and Margaret Woodward were both very involved with the Clark Memorial Library. They were charter members of the Bethany Library Association. They're seen here with other charter members like Mr. and Mrs. Bice, Mr. and Mrs. Hinman, Mr. Whitlock, Mr. and Mrs. Tyler Davidson, Professor and Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Carl Johnson, and Dwight Downs. There's another story that some of you may have heard about when they laid the cornerstone of the library. Sherman Jr. told his parents that he didn't want to go to the ceremony, and then at the last minute changed his mind. His mother said he could go, but because there was no time for him to change out of his dirty clothes, that he had to stay in the car and not get out. Well, I'm sure anybody that knows my father would not be surprised that the next day on the front page, on the newspaper picture, there he was, front and center. I'm sure he wasn't in his mother's good graces that day. Besides the dairy, Sherman Sr. had a large poultry operation. At one point, he had about 2,500 chickens. He delivered eggs to Naugatuck and New Haven, both wholesale to markets and retail, door to door, to private homes. These are portable chicken brooder houses, I believe they're called, that were placed out in a field on the south side of the farm. Helen and Marion were a little bit older than this. Actually quite a bit older than this, when I'm told they had quite an experience with one of these coops. The wood stove got too hot and started a fire. Helen and Marion and their hired man, Pat, put the fire out before the firemen could get there. Then they proceeded to check to see if the chickens were okay or if any had survived. I guess the chickens must have been overcome by the smoke or knocked out, because as Helen proceeded to toss chickens that she thought were dead out onto the ground, they would come to. And my Aunt Marion said she can still hear Pat with his Irish brogue exclaim, "Helen pronounces the chickens dead, and be glory they come to life again." Vegetables were grown on the farm, like cabbage, turnips, pumpkins, and Hubbard squash. If you look in the background here on the side porch, the whole porch is loaded up with squash to be put away for the winter. This is Sherman Sr. and his oldest daughter, Helen. This is actually what's left of a foundation of a two-story barn that used to stand at the corner of Johnson and Fairwood Road. That would be at what today is the Snyder home. The lower level underground was used for cool storage of turnip, cabbage, and winter squash. The upper level was used to store hay. I believe it was a drive-through hay mound type thing. North of the farm, near the corner of Fairwood and Falls, where the Farringtons lived today, was what was known as the Mansfield Farm. In 1935, Seymour Grain and Coal placed liens on the house for debts that Nate Mansfield had with them. Before they could foreclose and put Nate out on the street, Sherman Sr. paid off the liens. He gave Nate life use of 3 coops, the bull barn, and 2 rooms upstairs, as well as 3 meals a day. But poor Nate was so distraught over the whole affair, he slept in the cow barn for 2 years after that. In 1936, the wash house from the Mansfield place was moved across the field onto Falls Road. This is where I grew up and where my parents live today. The alfalfa that is being mown in this field won Sherman Sr. the award of Best in the County in 1932. Here's another shot of the alfalfa with Sherman's 3 children in front. In 1932, when Bethany held its centennial celebrations, Clover Nook Farm put together this float for the parade to honor Bethany's early industries. In 1982, the float was replicated for Bethany's sesquicentennial parade. The same picket fence was used on both floats. The fence and the signs from the 1982 float have now been saved, so Clover Nook is ready for the next of Bethany's milestone celebrations. This is a surprise float that Clover Nook put into the 1932 parade to thank Professor Johnson for all he had done for the town. And here's that same truck back to work on the farm. Behind the truck, next to the shed, is an old corn binder that was used to cut corn stalks and tie them into bundles for winter storage to feed off to the animals. When corn choppers came about for chopping corn into silage, the corn binders were quickly cast aside. Now that shocks of corn are used popularly as lawn decorations in the autumn, my husband had to look far and wide to find one that he could restore and put to use on the farm again. In fact, he had a hard time finding parts, and he now gets parts for it from an Amish man in Pennsylvania. This is Miss Bertha Nettleton. When the children were small, she lived at the farm and helped Margaret with the housework, the washing, and cooking meals for the family and all of the hired men. And this is Margaret and Bertha out in the garden by the house, picking or weeding. Marion and Sherman Jr. were given this pony one Christmas as a present. His name was Bobby. I don't think Marion got much use out of the pony, but one of my father's jobs in the afternoon was to hook Bobby up to his pony cart and go fill the cart with wood and bring it up to the house and unload it. My aunts tell me that the pony had the patience of a saint, because he would stand at that back door by the kitchen for hours on end, because my father would bring 3 sticks in and go and play. He'd get another 3 sticks, he'd bring them in, and then he'd go do something else. And it took several hours before the cart was unloaded, and that pony would stand there and never move. Sherman Sr. was among the first in town to have a television set. Neighbors and friends would gather in the evenings to watch in the family home. The man from Naugatuck that sold him the set actually used to bring prospective customers up to the farm to see it. And of course, he never told them that once they got to set down in the valley, they'd never get the reception that we got up on the hill. The farm is now owned by Sherman and Margaret Woodward's 3 children. Helen on the right married Howard Fassett in 1945, and they had 2 daughters, my cousins Cindy and Donna. Marion on the right married Dudley Sandell in 1946, and they still live in the farmhouse today. Sherman Jr. in the center married my mom, Barbara Woodward, and Barbara Dawn, in 1953, and they have 4 children, Linda Susan, Russell Samuel, Sherman III, and myself. In 1962, Sherman Jr. took over running the farm. He raised hay and sweet corn and continued the dairy operation. When his hired man left in 1967, Marion's husband Dudley became partners with Sherman in working the farm. The dairy herd was sold in 1970. They continued to raise dairy replacement cattle after that. Helen and Marion were both 4-H members as children. Marion went on to be a 4-H leader, mentoring many local girls for over 25 years. She continued working on the National 4-H, the state 4-H Advisory Council for many years after that. Marion and her 4-H girls worked hard to make the Memorial Day Parade an annual event in Bethany. I guess somebody had a one-time event parade, and she and the 4-Hers wanted to make that an annual event, and they sure did. If you look over Marion's left shoulder, you can see my sister Linda's head peeking out, holding that banner. It was the many 4-H groups in town who also started Red Litter Day in Bethany. Following in her parents' footsteps, Marion also was a member of the Bethany Library Association for many years. When Marion retired from the association, I was very honored and very fortunate to be voted into her position. To the left of Marion is the Library Association's current president, Alvin Eisenman. Sherman Jr. had a pair of twin bull calves born on the farm that he trained in an oxen yoke. Their names were Amos and Andy. He showed them at different local fairs, but I think he had the most fun with them on the farm. Amos and Andy settled happily into retirement on the farm, and they are very fondly remembered and missed by all of us that knew them. It was in 1987 that I married my husband, Eric, or most of you know him as Rex, in the backyard in the beautiful flower gardens on the farm. During the 20th century, there have been 2 weddings and 3 wedding receptions held at the farm. In 1992, Rex began working the farm full-time, growing sweet corn, pumpkins, and raising a few pigs. Each year, he has added more varieties of produce and plants to sell at our farm stand. And of course, that means, as the business grows, that means growing larger quantities and working longer and longer hours. And it seems he adds new animals to our menagerie every year, too. Being the pumpkin farmer's wife, for some crazy reason, I thought we should have the biggest jack-o'-lantern display in town. My friends and neighbors have come to enjoy it so much that I really don't have the heart to let them all down on Halloween night. I'm very proud of, and so is my family, very proud of and grateful to my husband for working so hard with me to keep Clover Farm going for future generations to enjoy. And we truly appreciate all the local support we get from all of you in our endeavor to do that. We were recently very touched by a note our youngest son wrote to put in a Millennium Time capsule. It read, "I hope in 50 years that I live at Clover Nook Farm." And I Thank you all for coming tonight.
Well, you can see it again on tape when it's available in the library. Debbie, that's going to be a hard act to follow. And I think it's me that's going to give the next one. What can I say? Just so gratified to see. I think it's about 150 people here. But this was really a remarkable talk, and I think Debbie and her family have done wonderful.
I would like to add one thing. There are an awful lot of Clover Nook alumni I see amongst the audience, and if any of you have had your memories jogged, your favorite memories, we'd love to have you come up.
How about everybody that's
We'd
worked
love
on
to hear your
Clover
stories. I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories all my life, and I could be here all night to tell you them, but I'm sure I must have triggered some memories in someone out there.
George.
Anybody, you want to stand up? People that worked on Clover Nook Farm. Anybody? Come on, let's get up. Very, very good. Turn it over to you, sir.
Tony, what do you want?
I got a little memory. We used to come to Sherm's, my dad, and we used to buy a half a case of eggs. That was around 1935. And my mother was telling me that her name was Woodward, and traced the farm up, it might be a relative. Anyway, we used to get a half a case of eggs, bring them home, get a big crock out, and I don't believe we washed the eggs. We put them down in water glass. I don't know how many people want a water glass. But the eggs were good for a couple of years. I know my mother said, you want egg for breakfast? Go down cellar, reach in the gooey water glass, and I wouldn't know the difference from a fresh egg.
George, aren't you going to say anything?
It was just a beautiful family farm, and it still is, but it was fun to work there, very good. Remember the horse farm with the 4 horses in there? The cow barn and all the chickens. Pretty nice.
Oh, no. This I was worried about. Probably doesn't need a mic.
But yeah, it was great for name and all of his work. He named George because he was so small and skinny, the great Atlas. He named Russell Winters. He was tall and skinny, muscles. And he named Dwight a hound dog because he had a dog that could run faster than his old 37 Ford. And we really had quite a crew at the farm. I'll never forget the day Dwight fell asleep on the glider on the front porch. We were haying, and George sneaked up and tied his shoelaces. And he got across the road, and he says, "Come on, let's go." Dwight jumped up and over he went. And I think he chased him halfway down through the pasture. But we really had a lot of good time there. Arnold worked there with us. When he was a kid, he couldn't wait to get over there. He was only 14 to work on the farm. No, I really have a lot of great memories of that.
Did you get the name off?
From my dad.
From what?
When I was a baby, he called me Monkey Doodle, and then as I got older, he kept calling me Monkey.
How many bales of hay did you put up today?
680.
680 bales. I guess that's still a farm.
I'd like to thank Mary. She used to be my 4-H leader. Way back. Ellie tells me that she has tickets for the big soiree over at the Veterans Park on the 1st, and she would like to sell tickets tonight because they want to know how much food to order. So if you'd all line up, Ellie will sell you the tickets. In the back, we have goodies and drinks and that kind of thing.
Questions?
Questions?
Where did they cut the ice?
On the pond.
Which one?
We had 3 ice ponds. We had the one just north of Peck Barn. We had another one down in the back of the barn. And then the Mansfield farm, they had the biggest ice pond just south of my house. That was a tremendous one. In fact, Lawrence Peck used to tell me in the spring, the springs were so strong, they'd go fishing up there, and he said you could see the water turning because the springs were working so much. And back in the 40s, my sisters will tell you, Peck Road used to flood because that pond, the springs worked so much that a heavy rainstorm, Peck Road would flood right across what we call Hooker Brook.
When was the present barn that they're in use now for selling built? What year was that built?
Horse barn?
The horse barn.
That went way back, right there.
That was what about, that was built, I think, around 1740. The horse barn.
1740. That's probably the oldest building on the property right now.
Yeah.
It should be 1740, because the house was the cabin was
1840.
1840.
We just lost 100 years. Give or take. Anybody else have a question? Don't forget to shop Clover Nook Farm.